Alright guys, I'm going to show you how you can draw a section and export it at a different scale from your site plan and still get it into your frame. The first thing I'm doing is just reducing the transparency of my background image just by going into the material settings under properties and changing that. And now I'm using like very basic drafting tools like rectangles and polylines to just sketch over top of this already drawn section. And I'm just kind of ignoring the scale that Sami had placed them at. I'm just drawing it at the real units, and kind of assuming that this is represented in real units right here. So I'm just kind of double checking some of the dimensions as I go. Word of advice, a typical bench height is 45 centimeters from the ground. A chair is usually 65 centimeters and handrails are 1.2 meters. So just double checking the size of this person. He's a little bit oversized. If I look at the width of this element, I think it's actually drawn at the same scale instead of at 1 to 250 like Sami has said. So I'm just going to keep drafting as if I'm drawing in real units. So I'm going to offset this bench by 0.45 and then make it 1 meter wide. And now I think I'm just going to throw in a couple silhouettes just so that I can have something to refer to. So I'm going into the CAD blocks in our graphic assets and I'm just importing that as a DWG. I have pressed ZSA just to like get that all in, and I think these are at these are probably in millimeters, so they're 1,000 times too large for our file. So I'm going to move them to the origin, and then I'm going to use scale to scale them down. So I'm scaling them by 0.001, which would bring them down to meters. And I can just double check this by measuring the heights of these guys. Humans are usually between 1.6 to 1.9 meters for extremely tall people. So these look like they're about right. And now I'm just going to select a silhouette that I want to use as a scale figure and pop it into my section right there. I'm just going to use mirror to put her in the right direction. And now I'm going to go through and like kind of organize my layers just a little bit. So I'll make a new one for my silhouettes. And then I will also kind of double check my other layers. I have one called L-sec thin, which is for thin lines. I'm going to create another one called L-sec thick for my thicker lines. So I can put all of these section cut lines except for my silhouette onto the thick one. And then I will draw in those background details on my L-sec thin layer. So now those are on the right layer. I'm going to actually change this one to gray. And now I can select all of my line work from my section, and I will export this to an Illustrator file at the scale 1 to 100. So to do that, I'm going to say 1 meter is equal to 10 millimeters. And now if I go into my Illustrator file and drag it in, there it is right there. So I'm going to copy that over into my frames file. And you see, because our frame is at 1 to 200 and our section is at 1 to 100, so it's actually double the size of the frame, which makes sense. Because remember, we're drawing in real units in Rhino. So what I've drawn there is a real size section, and as I export it, it's double the size of the rest of my drawing. That's totally fine. Just be aware of how these are fitting into frames and maybe do a few tests as you go to see what's an appropriate scale for you to export these at. So I am just popping these into different layers, and I'm using this select same appearance command to divide those up into different layers. And that way I can just select the layer itself and apply line styles. Okay, now I can allocate my line weights and my colors for each of the layers. Remembering that I want my section cut line to be the thickest, so I'm going to do that pretty thick, and then my background stuff can be a lot thinner. The silhouette, I'm actually just going to reverse this so that it has a white fill and then black line work over top, and I'm going to really reduce that line weight so it's not too thick, so she kind of stands out from the rest. Okay, so now what we want to do is actually going to select all of those layers, and you can do that just by pressing down Control while you select all the layers to the side. And I'm going to create a new layer called clipping plane and draw a rectangle or a square inside. That's going to help me cut away the rest of the stuff. So if I group all the rest of those lines together and then select the clipping plane and select the group, right click and go create clipping mask, you can see that it creates a clipping mask over top of this frame so that the rest of the drawing is cut away. So you don't have to worry about like cutting lines or getting rid of them. Just use a clipping mask to sort of show and not show what you want. So if you want to edit this, you're going to have to double click inside the clipping mask and double click again so that you can edit the line weights, as I'm going to do right here. Now, just a note, if you want to figure out how big you want to create your Photoshop file for your frames, you can do that by checking the properties of this line. So if we click here in properties, and if that's not available, just go to Window, Properties. Initially, you might think it's this X value here, which says 10 point something inches. But if we double check using our rulers, and I'm just going to turn those on by pressing Control R, double check your units by right clicking in the upper corner, and we see it's in inches. Now, if we actually drag this to the corner of our object, you can see the rulers adjust to measure that object. And if I look over to the side here, I think it's 5 point something inches. So if I look at my properties, that corresponds to the height. That makes sense because this is a vertical object. So just be aware that if you want to know how big of visuals you need to make, 5 to 6 inches in this case is probably going to cover it. So your visuals don't need to be huge. You can create your boards in Photoshop for each visual at this size. So that's about it. And now you know kind of like what to work towards for all of your drawings, what size to make them and how to display them properly.